I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is the Urban Renewal Commission for Wednesday, February 4th. Good evening. I'm Alice Norris, Commission Chair.
Don Slack, Commissioner.
Rob Crocker, Commissioner.
Brian Shaw, Commissioner.
Doug Neely, Commissioner.
Nancy Walters, Commissioner.
James Nasita, Commissioner.
Rocky Smith, Commissioner.
Thank you. We will break from our usual habit of introducing the room because is to consider the minutes of January 21st. May I have a motion for approval of the minutes? Do you have a question about them? Okay, Commissioner Neely.
On the second page, the line of my questions about the code and it being a seismic area of concern. The statement that's given here is the code was mostly bedrock, but there was some loose materials. I think we should have Nancy expressed uncertainty whether the bedrock occurred. Am I wrong or not?
I think I expressed that we were starting to get into the Columbia River basalt formation in that area of the river.
Did you claim it was mostly bedrock?
I didn't say
I
that
don't
per
think
se.
that was the case, so I don't think it's an accurate statement of what Nancy said.
It's hard to edit minutes. We want to look on that with the tape, and
We can go ahead and bring things back next time.
Yeah, we'll check the tape.
why don't we do that? It looks like we may have some other corrections as well. Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, page 3, bottom
Go, Rick.
bottom half. The two comments attributed to me actually are Jim Nasita's, and on page
Okay, that's important.
4, on the page 4 where it says Commissioner Smith, that's also Commissioner Nasita, and on the same page where it says Commissioner Nasita, that was Commissioner Smith.
Oh, someone's gotten you two mixed up.
So,
That's how I did the Oregon City News, do something like that.
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. Okay, are there other corrections for the minutes? All right, let's bring those back at our next meeting then for adoption while we consider that other item.
As a point of information, it was the
Yes,
Oregonian.
All right. Thank you. We aim to be accurate here also. Okay. I'd like to insert an item just very briefly for, because we are a very new commission. We haven't met very many times together, and we don't have an item on here called future agenda items. And I would like to add that to the agenda for the future because it's uncertain, I think, of how you do that. When we add an item to the agenda, it's actually a cost. It is something that means the majority of us wish to add that for discussion, and we wish to have staff research and bring back to us a full report on that. So this would be an opportunity for commissioners to put forward something and gain agreement from the majority to move that forward to a next agenda item. Commissioner Nasita has put forward via email an item that got a great deal of attention, and we didn't discuss how the process should work, so I've asked Mr. Patterson to respond to that, and then if following that response you wish to add that to a future agenda, then that's possible to do.
If I can clarify, my proposal was not a formal one to add to the agenda.
Okay.
I just wanted to get a discussion going in the community. I wasn't proposing it as something that we actually act on at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, and if that was
Okay.
not sufficiently clear, that's my fault.
Oh,
But-
it wasn't. I think that you also may wish to, don't forget that if any of you have an item for the agenda, also you have a staff resources that you can go to help you clarify where you may want to go with your idea. So, are there those who wish to add agenda items? Well, then may we bypass Larry's response, or wish?
If Mr. Patterson has concerns, I'm perfectly
Well, he's-
interested in hearing them.
Okay, he's addressed it via email.
Again, Commissioner Nasita and I have not spoken, so I'm a little unclear on what the proposal is, but based on the email, I believe the proposal was can we use urban renewal dollars to help fund the Park Place School to help prevent it from closure? It raises a number of issues for the Urban Renewal Commission to consider, and there's probably 5 major issues. The first is, can you use urban renewal dollars for operational expenses? And if you, I've forwarded you the emails that in the research I've done, and we asked Harvey Rogers that question, and he responds that no one believes that tax increment dollars can be used for operational expenses, and goes on through his memo and cites some of the statutes in regards to that. So the first question in regards to using it for those purposes, everyone I've talked to, that appears to be a strong, you cannot do that. Second question is, even if you could, would it matter? And I've given you a memo there dealing with school finance, and you kind of see how that works. That's still applicable for school finance. In regards to transferring urban renewal dollars, there may be an opportunity to use those for those, to put it into the mix and it not be part of the local match, but you still have number 1, which says you can't do that. 3 is, you should make no mistake about it, amending the plan, particularly with a boundary expansion, is not an easy process, and that's going to take some time. And even if you could get past number 1, whether you could do this in time, because last time it only took us, 8 months to get the plan amended, and this would probably be more controversial than that. Fourth issue is, you're going to be faced with an issue where a smaller taxing entity, namely the City of Oregon City, is subsidizing a larger taxing entity, the school district. So you're going to have a number of folks who's not going to pay an equal amount for that cost, because, again, you're taking those dollars from the smaller taxing entity. And fifth, depending on the amount you want to transfer and how you do that, and there was no specifics on that, is you only have limited dollars now to deal with. So everything else you're talking about, you're going to have to reprioritize what you're doing. It would probably derail what we are here to talk about this evening. I don't know if you can have a conversation in the community without a consensus on the Urban Renewal Commission that you even want to have that conversation. I think it creates an interesting discussion. I think in this case it's got a lot of people believing this is something that can be done, when in fact you've got a legal problem here whether you could even use those dollars for that purpose. Because I don't know about you guys, but it has really tied me up for the last day and a half trying to deal with emails that's come in because of that proposal. So I think it's really something you need to come together as a board and decide whether that's a direction. Be glad to research it and look at it before we really jump off on this. And we've spent probably a couple $1,000s in research here on this question, and I don't even know if that's something the board wants to undertake. So that's...
Is that something that the commission would like to add to a future agenda, given the, I need to see head nods on that. I don't know.
Calling on people or what?
No, I just want it, because it's not a discussion item, it's just do we add it to a future agenda?
I want the discussion to continue in the community, but I don't want staff to spend, research dollars on it. And again, I didn't mean the email to trigger that process, and I mean that's a learning process.
Yeah, great.
So,
Okay, thank you very much. And so, yes, you have other agenda items? Yes, Commissioner West.
I would like to comment on that,
On adding,
on Mayor or Commissioner Nadee's comments.
I
would like to
don't,
respond to his comments.
is it about, it's actually not open for discussion right now, but you, go ahead.
Thank you. I spend a lot of time fielding phone calls and emails about this issue, and I don't think it's right to be having a conversation in the community that isn't, or on a broad base with, news media and other, government entities involved, unless it is a vote of the commission here. So I guess you don't realize your power when now that you're a commissioner, that everyone thinks that whatever you're saying is the absolute. So that's the kind of phone calls I've been fielding all day is, well, I thought this could be done. Well, we at Urban Renewal Commission as a body have not had this discussion. And I would have felt better having this discussion before I pick up the phone and try to defend or, whatever. So.
Well, let's,
Yeah, the comment is, I think that it's important that we know that response. I don't know may have been a better way of dealing with it, but what it is an issue of what can and cannot be done with it. So
Right.
That's something we should all know.
Right, and we had, we didn't have a process here at Urban Renewal for adding items to the agenda, so now that you know, so we'll put that on after, right at the top, so that we can forward those, because I know some of you will have things that you wish to discuss. Because the agenda is heavy, I didn't want to be distracting, but could we move into the next item? That is to consider the approval of a development agreement with Pacific Property Search.
Okay, and I'm going to turn to Steve Janik, who is Special Counsel at Urban Renewal, to walk you through the development agreement.
Good afternoon, members of
Point of
the...
information, can I?
Commissioner Casita? Casita?
Again, and this goes again to my, an issue of my being new on this commission and needing to bone up on the processes and how things work. And I actually do have I think a question that precedes review of the development agreement. And I want to know, get some sense of why we are considering a development agreement at this time. When I got the binder full of items on my porch the other day, I thought I was going to have, a binder of financial information about feasibility, a market study, a bank commitment letter, things that I think a banker would consider in loaning money. I don't want to be any less careful with, the tax increment money than a banker would in making a loan. And I don't have in this packet, we got the same land use application that the Planning Commission got, which I don't think relates to a decision of an Urban Renewal Commission. And I'd just like to, float that question as to the sequence of items and why we are making being asked to make a decision on this, and even paying for the preparation of a development agreement when I really have a concern about whether we have enough information, due diligence information on the financial aspect of this before we go into this stage of consideration of all of this.
Okay, please use that as part of your response.
Let me kind of turn the clock back a little bit and give you the history of what has led us to this point. As we indicated last time, we've been at this process now for 2.5 years. It began because many years ago the Urban Renewal Commission purchased the Cove, and I think there's been some planning around the Cove, and I think what is laid out in this particular plan fits into that plan that has been talked about in terms of the type of mixed use for this particular area. We did recruit these developers to take a look at this process. They did enter into a due diligence period in looking at that. We did begin to sit down and talk about a public-private partnership. That has led to the development of the development agreement is around that. Some of the things that you will look at and you will need to decide whether in approving this development agreement is, do you agree with what is being asked, primarily the public contribution to this particular development agreement. The actual bank financing, again, Mr. Parks last meeting kind of walked through how we're going to do that. That piece in regards to the line of credit, we still are in the process of working through. We will bring that forward. You'll look at those documents in terms of that particular financing, which actually is to the Urban Renewal Commission. What you have to look at here is the Urban Renewal Plan, and does the plan generate the finances that can cover the type debt that we're incurring. And again, as Mr. Parks outlined at the last meeting, you have the ability right now to issue roughly $16 million worth of debt. We've already issued 10. We could issue another 6. In approximately 3 years, the district will grow to the point that it can cover that debt service without the addition of any additional increment from the Cove development. Increment on the Cove development or any subsequent development only improves that financial standing, and that, again, you'll see some of that with the letter of credit when it comes forward, because they're going to have to, the bank will have to do its due diligence of whether or not there is sufficient increment within the urban renewal district, or that our credit is good enough to issue that type of line of credit and eventually convert that to bonds. So again, you're looking at this piece this evening. You'll be looking at the line of credit when we get ready to approve that transaction. As Mr. Leland was reminding too, what has kind of led us to this point that this project fits in is a broader regional center strategy that is been developed as far as the economic development strategy, because Oregon City is one of the regional centers designated by Metro, and this is the type density you're trying to bring in so that we can meet that regional center status.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is Steve Janik. I'm outside counsel that the city's retained to work on this development agreement. The development agreement you see in front of you is a draft, but we're getting pretty close in our negotiations with the other side, and so therefore we thought it was appropriate to bring it before you. My purpose here this afternoon is to walk you through it and answer your questions and get your comments, because you are the ultimate client in this matter. I understand that you've had a copy of this, albeit not for very long, and you also have separately received the exhibits, which are an integral and important part of the document. And please feel free to interrupt me at any time so I can respond to your questions. The purpose of this document is basically to provide the detailed commitments that the Urban Renewal Agency is making to Pacific Property Search, and the commitments that they're making to you that will ultimately lead to a project that is one that you have approved, and one that is consistent with your urban renewal plan, and one for which your financing is feasible. Underlying that is the preceding judgment that this is a project that you want to see and that you are willing to invest tax increment dollars in. The basis for the need for tax increment dollars is laid out on the first 3 pages. It recites the current condition of the property, which by all legal standards meets that of being a blighted property. We detail all the development constraints and all the problems with the property, and it notes that the property was appraised by PGP valuations, and it was determined that in its current condition it had a negative value. That negative value notion is something that is kind of odd, in that we all assume that everything's got a positive value. But what the appraisers are simply saying is that in order to overcome the current inherent limitations and problems in the property, you're going to have to spend a lot of money. And if you spend that significant amount of money and you bring it up to a condition that it can be developed, then it will have a value. And we will get to what that value is as we get through the document. But the basic proposition is the finding on your part that, as is recited in the recitals, this is a blighted property that needs public investment through tax increment financing in order to enable this project that is consistent with your urban renewal plan to proceed. This document contemplates that there will be a number of conditions that have to be met before the city, before the Urban Renewal Authority is obligated to proceed. And so, as you see in Section 1, it has a term that basically says its term starts when we sign it, but it can be terminated in a number of circumstances if certain preconditions have not been satisfied or have not been met. In Section 2, we talk about defining what the project site is. And the best way to explain that is in reference to the exhibits that are Exhibits B and 1, 2, 3, and 4, which lay out the current ownership. Basically, a portion of the property is owned by the city. That portion, it is contemplated, will be transferred to the Urban Renewal Agency for no consideration. Another portion of the property is owned by the Urban Renewal Agency. There is a portion of the property formerly owned by Glacier, which is now under contract with Pacific Property Search. That is a long, skinny piece that is an integral part of the infrastructure that needs to be built here. And then there's a parcel that is being purchased in 2 segments from Parker Pond, which is the Parker family entity. And again, that property is currently under contract with Pacific Property Search. The way Pacific Property Search has organized the project is they've organized it into 8 different phases. Each of those phases is identified on a separate exhibit in the series of exhibits C-1 through C-8. Now, those phases basically consist of, in simple terms, phases 1 and 2 will be all the work that is necessary to put the property into a condition such that it can be developed. Phase 3 will be taking about 7 acres of the property and putting it into a physical condition so that it can be acquired by Kaiser and can be developed by Kaiser as an approximately 80,000 square foot medical office building. Phases 4, 5, 6, and 7 are then down the road. They will be on the land that has been improved in phases 1 and 2. They will be the property where you will see the development of the 224 condominium units in phases as the market accepts them. In addition, that's where you will see the potential 54,000 square feet of additional office space, restaurant space. The last phases will be certain public amenities, including in-water boat docks, canoe launch areas, a potential dock for the sheriff, and other things. So that's kind of the overview of how that fits together. Those collectively describe for you what is the product that is going to be built with your investment. And in addition to seeing those, you'll see later on the document, you have to approve all of that. The point of that is to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what you're going to get for your investment, and you have the ability to give a more detailed approval of that to review exactly what they're doing. Now, in addition, you are acting in the capacity of what we call your proprietary capacity. Those of you who are city council members are not sitting here acting in your regulatory capacity. There is a separate and parallel process that is the regulatory land use process. And this document has made it very clear that no decision by the Urban Renewal Agency in any way taints, preempts, or prejudges what might come out of the land use approval process. I would say for you, having done a substantial number of these public-private partnerships, that is not only legally required, it's appropriate, and in fact it works. Because you're looking at it from a different point of view. You're not judging it by the land use criteria. You're judging it by the criteria of whether or not this project is what you want to see, what you want to be a partner in, and whether this is the kind of thing you want to see for your community to fulfill your urban renewal plan. Those are 2 different sets of standards. In Section 4 of the document, we detail the land use approvals that are necessary for the developers to obtain. And I underscore it is necessary for the developers to obtain. The developers have been aggressive, I think, by the applications that you've seen. Those have been submitted. And those applications and the land use approvals they get have to be approved by you, again, in your proprietary capacity as, in effect, partners in this project. You have to be satisfied with that. In Section 4.3, you also have to approve the detailed plans for phases 1 and 2. And here's the big concern. Phase 1 and 2 is the heavy lifting. 40-some thousand truckloads worth of dirt have to get moved in and out. Steel piles have to be removed along the banks. Non-native vegetation has to be removed. The banks have to be recontoured. Material that has already been filled on the site that's not engineered fill needs to be extracted. New fill has to be put in. And then the whole thing has to be recontoured, and then it has to be landscaped, because there will be a period of time after that work is done before you start seeing condominiums being developed there. And it was in the instructions to us to make very sure that the way that looks, that area, once that work is done, the way that area looks and feels is satisfactory to you and the public. It would not be satisfactory if they scraped, did all their work, and left it there just as bare dirt. And so those plans detail what it has to look and feel like, and there has to be public access to the cove once that is completed. The same is true with respect to what's called the North Park, which is a public park that is to the north of the project, which will be part of that Phase 1 and Phase 2 work. So those plans need to draw your careful attention to make sure that you are satisfied with how that is going to look and feel until they start building the condominiums. Now, in Section 5, this says, okay, we've got a deal, we signed up, but we're not ready to proceed with this project, and we're not ready to proceed with our investment until certain preconditions have been met to the satisfaction of the agency. We have not yet figured out how much time we need to do that, so you'll see in Section 5.1 there is a blank. It's one of the things we're still working on filling out. But the idea is that they will have a limited time to meet these preconditions, within which we will also have our judgment as to whether or not the conditions have been met. If they've been met, we proceed. If they haven't been met, we either renegotiate or you say deal off, deal over. Those preconditions are detailed on page 8, and basically that the preconditions are you have to agree on the master plan, which is attached to this. You have to agree on the Phase 1 and 2 plans, which we talked about a moment ago. You have to approve the land use applications they're submitting. For example, if they submitted a land use application that asked the right to build something other than what they showed you on the exhibits here, you would say no. And that's the double check on that. In addition to that, they have to get all of the land use approvals. There have to be no appeals, or if those appeals have been filed, the LUBA decision has to be favorable to the action of the City Council in approving those land use approvals. We are not obligated to proceed unless we have obtained the credit facility that will provide the cash with which you are going to invest in this project. So if you can't obtain that credit facility on terms that you're satisfied with, you don't have to proceed. PPS has to have acquired that portion of the Parker property that they are buying. They have to have closed their sale of that piece to Kaiser. So if the Kaiser thing doesn't happen, and it's obviously a terribly important component of making this a success, if that deal doesn't close, you don't have to proceed. Here, they also have to get your approval on the construction contracts. And the reason for that is this. Once these construction contracts are let, they're going to be using your money to do the work that you've approved. But believe it or not, people sometimes in the position of PPS, I know they won't ever do this, but there are some developers who in the past on projects have defaulted. That construction contract will be such that it can be assigned to you so that you can then cause that work to be completed under the terms of that contract. You want that contract to have a guaranteed maximum price. You want that contract to say things that will protect you in the event you have to step into their shoes and complete it. That's why you have to approve that contract. In addition, they will be doing work before they actually acquire property that you own. So to give them the right to get on your property to do that work, we're going to have to negotiate certain easements. Those easements will give them the right to be there to do the work. Those easements will say they have to protect you from anything they do that injures your interest or your property. And again, that's something yet to be worked out. That's a precondition. And then another precondition is they actually not only have closed with Kaiser, but they've started to do the work on the Kaiser site in order to bring that up above the 100-year floodplain, which is the condition for Kaiser going ahead. So, for example, if Kaiser bought the property and they failed to do the work, and that gave Kaiser the right to walk away, we wouldn't want to be obligated to proceed, and that's why they have to actually start the work. In addition to that, going forward, we're going to be buying, because we don't own it, we're going to be buying that glacier piece so that it becomes part of the Urban Renewal Agency's ownership, and we're going to be buying a small portion of the Parker piece that is not being sold to Kaiser, but is an important part of what we need to own to make sure the streets go in, and so that we own all of the property necessary for the project. So they have to, as a condition of our obligation to proceed, get both Parker and Glacier to assign to us the right to step up when and if we are ready to acquire those parcels.
I have a specific question.
Yes, sir.
What you've been talking about just now. My understanding is their obligation in terms of procuring property is going to development. What we are obtaining is land that's going to make it suitable for the city-owned portion.
Correct.
So those are the distinctions in terms of
Correct.
what we pay for and what Pacific Properties Search pays for.
Absolutely correct.
Okay.
Then there has to be an agreement with ODOT because ODOT is requiring certain improvements with respect to State Highway 99 in order to accommodate the project. So the developer has to go out and get a satisfactory agreement with ODOT. And we have to approve of that agreement because there is always, again, the possibility that we may have to step into their shoes. So we don't want an agreement that they might be happy with, but we're not happy with. So those are the basic preconditions, and when all those pieces come together, when they're all acceptable to you, then that's the point at which you would have the obligation to proceed with your part of the deal. They would have the obligation to proceed with their part of the deal. Now, the estimates of the necessary public investment are approximately $10 million. And we have until May 1st to obtain a credit facility for that amount. The idea being that in the short run, there would be a loan from the bank, a credit facility, and when the increment rises to the appropriate level, not increment from this project, but from the district as a whole, that facility would be paid back with long-term tax increment-backed bonds. And so that's the financing structure. Section 7, we talk about the fact that we've got to approve the construction contract. The developer has been using Hughes Construction, and they've been using what's called a design-build form of contract, which generally speeds up time and saves money. In effect, you don't do all the design and then stop and then build. What you do is you design and then build as you move along, so it speeds things up and saves money. There is an issue here. The issue is whether or not, because we are investing public money in this, that contract is a public contract as that's defined in the ORS. And your counsel, Ed Sullivan, believes that it is a public contract. And this issue has emerged fairly recently. So there are two choices. Either the public contract, if it is one, has to be bid to other parties, or alternatively, you have to adopt an exemption from public bidding, which basically is you making a judgment, and we're not asking you to do that tonight, that there are good and valid reasons recognized by the statute as to why it would be better for this project and your interests to proceed with this and not go through a public bidding process.
Who will determine the outcome of that conflict?
Well, the ultimate decision is yours, and you will be guided by Ed Sullivan, your normal counsel, and we're talking with Ed about an appropriate possible exemption that we would come back to you at a later time. And that exemption would be based on, here are the facts, here's what the statute says, do the facts justify an exemption? If you go to Section 8, this details where you start investing the public money. The first is the acquisition of this Parker Phase 2 property, which, as Commissioner Neely correctly pointed out, this is approximately a 3-acre piece that is unrelated to the Kaiser development. You would also be acquiring the Glacier parcel. And then on page 12 in Section 831, here's where we get into you spending the significant money for the Phase 1 and 2 work. It's been estimated by the contractor that they've been working with that that work is going to cost approximately $8.158 million. Again, the contractor has given or will give a guaranteed maximum price to back that up. So that number is potentially going to change, but we think that's pretty accurate. Now, what we have done is this. We have identified on those exhibits that say the work they're going to do, we've identified a maximum reimbursable cost. So that, let's say on Phase 1, there's a line item that says we're going to remove all these steel pilings from along the cove. There'll be a line item in there, in that budget, and the budget is attached as an exhibit, and it'll say that that work is going to cost $800,000. That means that you never have to spend more than $800,000 for that. That is the contractually maximum reimbursable amount. So if it comes in at $850,000, that's not our problem. It's a problem of the developers and their contractor. If it comes in for less than $800,000, you don't spend $800,000, you spend the lesser of. So that way, on a line item basis throughout the budget, we have shown where the public dollars are going to go. We've capped your exposure at that amount. Anything less than that, you save. Anything above that is not your responsibility. So you don't run the risk of a cost overrun. And that is, of course, again, backed up by the guaranteed maximum price that will be in the construction contract. Now, that money will not be doled out easily. The way that money will be doled out is if you were to go to a bank and do a construction loan to build some apartments, the way it would work with the bank is every month you show up and you say, okay, here's my architect, my contractor, and they're telling you that 7% of the work has been done. And they sign in blood and said, yes. And then here are contractor lien releases that release the contractor's lien that says, yeah, none of the subs have any right to a lien on the property. They all agree that 7% of the work has been done. And then you would get paid 7% up to the maximum reimbursement amount. That money will be doled out by the Urban Renewal Agency just as though you were a construction lender. And the document says that commercially reasonable construction lending practices will be applied in the disbursement of the money. In addition to that, if this project requires the payment of prevailing wages under Oregon law, the developer has two choices. And these are developer choices. The developer can say to the Bureau of Labor and Industries, I only believe that a certain portion of the project requires prevailing wages, not what the condos we may build down the road. And if the Bureau of Labor and Industries agrees that that's the law, then the developer has to pay prevailing wages on what is described as the public improvement work. If, however, the Bureau of Labor and Industries takes a different position and says, no, our view is that the Kaiser building must pay prevailing wages, then the developer is obligated to follow the law on that. We are not exempting them from that. We're not giving them any kind of break. We're simply saying that at that state law level, whatever BOLI says, you have to comply with. In addition, in Section 8.6, as they do this work, we take ownership of the work they're doing. So whatever improvements they make, you own from the minute they touch the ground. And in addition, then, when the Phase 1 and Phase 2 work is done and it's landscaped and it's treed, until they start building the condos, the city will maintain that as though it were a public park to the public park standards. Now, if the developer wants it maintained to a higher standard because they want it to look nicer in order to accelerate their condominiums, in order to make Kaiser happier, they pay the extra cost of any maintenance over and above that. Now, that gets us now up to the point where the developer is now ready to start building some condos. And here's the problem. We don't know when that's going to be. What we have worked out here is where the developer has an option. And the option is to take down in phases those land areas where the condos would be built. The developer has a period of 4 years within which to take down the first segment. If they don't, the deal is over. And what we get is the property. Your dollars invested have now brought it up to a development standard. The developer will lose about $5.3 million that they have spent to date in all of their work. They will get nothing for that. You will get the benefit from that, which is inherent in the project that is then ready for development, and you would be free to choose another developer or to choose whatever you wanted to do. If they do exercise that option, they have to come to us with a detailed plan for what they're going to build. And they have to come to us and demonstrate that they have the financial capability to build what it is they say they're going to build. So we can be assured that we're going to be satisfied with what they build and they actually can build it. And then the document requires that they build it within 18 months. If they fail to do that, they have no further option. But if they do build, then they get an option on the next phase. And we keep rolling like that until they've covered the entire site. But in each case, if they stumble, if they don't perform, the option and all of their rights terminate at that point. So, now, what do they pay? What they pay is this. In some projects like this, the developer will be sitting here asking you to give them this land for free. That's frequently done because the land is so troubled. But the point is, at this stage where they're now ready to develop condominiums, through your investment, you have made this land valuable. And my view of the urban renewal statute is that the statute explicitly says you can sell property at its, quote, fair reuse value. And so what would happen then is, let's say this first chunk of land they're taking down, there would then be an independent appraisal of what is the fair reuse value of that land. That's the price they would pay. But we have agreed to give them a credit against that price for all the dollars they've spent to date and invested in the project. And those dollars, as you'll see, are enumerated, are not enumerated, but the dollars are referenced in section 9.4.4, and you see in brackets there, amounts to be verified. That's on page 16. We will be auditing whether they have actually spent those dollars on this project to make sure that is the case. And we have agreed to give them 15% interest on those invested dollars, which is not an unreasonable interest rate for the risks that developers take in doing projects like this and spending those dollars. And we have also agreed that the credit would include $1.2 million as a recognition of their sweat equity, hard work, talent, creativity, and imagination in putting this together. Now, that credit, let's say it's a $6 million number. As they take down and pay for the land, they don't use up the credit first. The credit gets spread out over all 224 condominiums. So let's say the credit was $6 million. You divide it by 224, and let's say they take down a parcel that's going to have 30 condo units, and the appraiser says those 30 condo units, the land is worth $4 million. They would get a credit against that $4 million based upon 30 condo units divided by 224. So they would, in order to get the full benefit of that credit, they have to build the entire project. And that's why if at any point they fail, they stop developing, something like that, then they lose that. So this is a real strong incentive that we've given them to perform what they propose to perform. The other alternative would be to say, oh, well, we'll give you the credit every time you take land down until you use the total credit up, which would not be smart. So the credit is structured to make sure that they proceed, and if they don't proceed, then we get the property back. In addition, you will see in section 9.3 that every time they go to exercise an option to buy some of that land, you have to approve the schematic plans and specifications. Now, that's more than just blobs on a map. What you're approving is kind of the three-dimensional exterior of what it is that you're going to see. That's to prevent them from saying, well, we're going to put up, T111 siding on the outside of these buildings. And you're going to say, no. This gives you that opportunity to say no. They have to satisfy you with what they're going to build. And there are a number of other terms and conditions, including that, again, they have the financial capability to build what they say they're going to build. So the rest of the document is what you might want to call legal stuff or boilerplate. It's important to me, probably not to you. I won't take your time up with that. The only one I would point out is if you go to page 20, section 11.8, this section is a disclaimer on our part where we basically tell them we are making no representations or warranties to you whatsoever regarding the property of the city and the property of the agency. And it goes on for your benefit for well over a page and a half. And it means to them, okay, you guys have done your due diligence. If you get out there and find something real bad, it's your problem, not ours. And this, you can't turn around and say, well, you know, you told us this, and this protects the agency and the city from any claim that you have any responsibility for the conditions inherent in the property. Final thing is, this agreement cannot be assigned, page 24. This is one tiny issue we have to work out with the developer. Our concern here is we don't want this developer to lose interest and assign it to somebody else. And we've put in here that they can't assign it without your approval. The only issue we're discussing is what's the standard that would guide your approval. We started with sole discretion language. Sole discretion means you could deny an assignment if you didn't like the new developer because the new developer had an ugly tie. They've pushed back and said we want it to be commercially reasonable. And I think that's appropriate, and we can work that out. So if you had any commercially reasonable meaning based upon your investment, if you've got any rational basis to say, no, we don't want this to be assigned, you can say no. So, happy to respond to any questions. I appreciate your attention on a complex document.
I have a question, Steve. Since you have some holes in the document, and you have a couple of pieces that are yet unfinished, even if we wished to, we couldn't
You
really
shouldn't.
adopt this. We should
You
not
should.
adopt this evening.
You should.
Okay. And do we have a deadline for adopting this?
At the present time, that deadline is February the 20th, I believe it is, which, 19th, excuse me. So you have one more meeting prior to that. Based on some late conversations this afternoon, that may get extended. So at the present time, I would suggest we meet again on the 18th. I think that's the next City Commission meeting, if I got my dates correct. And we'll plan to meet then, but if those deadlines get pushed back because of terms we're still working on, we may have more time in which to make this decision. Now, you may want to meet more, just because this is a lot of information you have to work through, and I know there's a number of questions. Commissioner Nocita has asked a number here this evening that, again, I think you want to be satisfied with the decision you're making, and again, this is a big step.
And what is that deadline based upon?
It's based, right now, it's based upon the closure date between Kaiser and PPS, and if that date slides, then that gives us more time to make this decision.
The basic linkage is Kaiser wants to close only if there's going to be a project. And if we don't have a DDA with the developer, there might not be a project.
Okay. Commissioner West.
I have kind of a basic question. When you were talking about prevailing wages in Boley, is that because this is public money, and is it synonymous with union-type issues and scaled pay, or?
Yes.
Is that what that means?
Answer to both your questions is when there is a level of public investment that creates what's called a public improvement, then it becomes under state law subject to prevailing wages. And that's why there's a serious possibility this part of this is a prevailing wage job. So, for example, the portion of this that's going to be a public street is a public improvement. It's built with public money. That's in the Phase 1, Phase 2. So it sure looks like it's subject to prevailing wage. Now, prevailing wage is defined by the State Bureau of Labor and Industries, and it reflects by type of trade that wage which they determine to be prevailing on public works projects. And it generally does mean that those would be union wage jobs, not non-union wage jobs.
Thank you.
I would actually like to, if there are questions from the citizen members of the commission, I would like to rotate those. So this would be a citizen question. Is that all right? Ready? Okay. Commissioner Walters.
I don't know who to direct this question to because it's got multiple parts involving the financing. The goal of my question is to determine exactly what the public investment is. And also, related to that, I would like to know at what point in time that public investment will have been covered through the increment increase. So I'm kind of curious because it looks like we're looking at about $10 million worth of public funds. And this is coming from page 17 of the staff report that we received in January.
It's in here, too.
And then it looks like if you go to the development agreement on page 17, you talked about that credit, and then it's also referenced up here on page 17 under the private investment as, it looks like it's anywhere from $5.5 to $6 million.
No. The public investment consists of three pieces. The three pieces are the purchase price we would pay for the Glacier property, which is a matter of contract, and will be set forth in the document under which we get an assignment of that. The next piece is the amount to be paid for the 3-acre Parker piece. And then the final amount is the $8,158,000 that is referred to in, I can't find it right now.
It's also on page 17.
Yeah, page 12. Page 12. That's the sum of the public investment, and the sum of those three components adds up to 10.
So-
That has nothing to do with the credit amount.
Okay, but the credit is also going to be a credit against future sale price.
Against-
So it effectively reduces what the public recovers from the sale of the
That is
property.
correct. That is correct.
Okay. I'm curious how you came up with the added value on the project site of $1.2 million, if that's been
It was
appraised?
a negotiated amount, and you look at the fact these people have been working on the project for 3 years. If you look at the amount of risk they've taken, if you look at the amount of work they've done, we all threw out different numbers. We negotiated it back and forth. They wanted, needless to say, a higher number. We started with a lower number, and in the collective judgment of Larry, Dave Leland, our real estate consultant, and myself, we thought that was reasonable. But it's subject to your ultimate judgment.
My third piece of the question is, you've got Oregon City property now, Track B, current ownership, and it is slated to go to PPS. Is the transfer price included? Where is that? How does that get conveyed?
When the fair reuse value is determined, that will pick up all of the property. So that piece there will be subject to a fair reuse valuation.
Okay.
Right.
Did you wish to
Do
respond?
you know what the current valuation of that property is?
Well, according to the appraisal, it's negative.
12 million.
$12 million.
The city of Oregon City property, that's the negative 12 million?
The entire site has a negative 12 million. So we could go back to the appraisal and show you how negative the city piece is and how negative the agency piece is, but it all adds up to a negative 12 million.
Did you wish to respond, Mr. Leland?
Yes, if I could, just a context.
Please introduce yourself since you've not been on.
Certainly. I'm Dave Leland. I'm with Leland Consulting Group, advisor to the City of Oregon City. We've been involved now as advisors to over 80 downtowns, predominantly through public-private partnerships. And as we work across the country, the typical investment ratio for public and private dollars is about one public dollar for every 4 to 5 private dollars, on average. Sometimes it's 2 to 1, sometimes it's 10 to 1. This particular investment, based on the pro forma of the $10 million going into it and $158 million of total capital on the finished product after Kaiser and the condos are built out, has a ratio of about 15 to 1, hopefully higher than that. So it is quite high in terms of the leverage of public investment. plus it creates the gateway at the north entry to the city. So there's a number of spin-off benefits. It's just a context that I think sometimes it's important to understand.
Commissioner Neely?
I'm going to come back, on Nancy there. I really need to understand better the issue of the credit and the 15%. Now, let's say we've got a segment that they're going to work on and properties will be sold. They're bringing it down, let's say it's $1 million credit that we're giving, okay? Number one, we don't access that $1 million until it's needed. That is, we're not being charged on that $1 million until we, from whomever we're getting the money from, actually get that $1 million. Is that true?
Well, let me kind of give you, for instance, let's say that they want to take down what they call Phase 4, and it's going to be the site where they're going to build 40 condos.
Right.
And the fair reuse value for the 40 condos is $4 million. The credit they get, it's not like we write them a check. It's that we reduce the $4 million purchase price. And we would reduce the $4 million purchase price.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. That's not cash.
Okay.
That's not
Okay.
cash.
Okay.
So what we would do is, let's say at that point in time, their credit was, as I said, $5 million. You divide $5 million by 224 condos. That gives them a credit of, my head math, let's say $20,000 a unit. So if they're taking down this piece on which they can put 40 units and they get a credit of $20,000 per unit, they'd get a credit of $800,000. We'd never write them a check. They'd just write us a smaller check. So instead of writing us a check for $4 million, they'd write us a check for $3.2 million.
Thank you.
I got other questions, but...
Well, go ahead. You got the mic.
In terms of this prevailing wages issue, I guess I got some concerns about seeking a waiver, but I'm wondering if that waiver can be partitioned in terms of what's going on at Kaiser and what's going on into the other phases.
Well, they would have they have the right to petition for a waiver under state law. We're not giving them that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just mirroring state law here. But, see, the real concern is when you've got a project that builds public improvements like streets and builds other things that are not public improvements, like for-sale condos, there's a legal issue as to whether the for-sale condos are part of the, quote, public project. So in our discussions with the developer, we basically said to him, look, if you think you can convince the Bureau of Labor and Industries that this piece of the project is not a public improvement, follow the law, follow the procedures. But we in Oregon City are going to do whatever BOLI requires.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to make it clear that we're not giving them any special benefit on this issue.
All right. On the maintenance issue, we've got this coming into phases, and we're saying the work to a maintenance standard comparable to the maintenance provided by city-owned parks. That's not very good maintenance. I mean,
those are your words, not mine.
Yeah, I know. I should rephrase that. That's not a fair statement. The parks do a great job, but we're talking about repairing areas in which you're removing invasives, and that is beyond our budget. That's a big issue. Well, let me phrase my question first. The question is this: that I was at the first Planning Commission meeting. Well, not the first. Well, I guess it was the first Planning Commission meeting. That was the one prior to the last one, where they were talking about establishing a repairing area and maintaining it for a 2-year period. Plants died, they'd replace them. I'm sure it was that kind of thing. We're talking about PPS desires to maintain at a higher level of maintenance. When this was originally being discussed, this most recent thing was recently discussed, they were talking about maintaining the public area next to the cove under their ownership, that it was public access. I objected strongly. I don't know why any jurisdiction would give up waterfront property. But my expectation is that I would like to see that maintenance covered in some mechanism or another by the properties that are developed there. They're the ones that are going to get the maximum benefit, I believe, of having what will be a far better product than it is today. And I was thinking that maybe some kind of a fee, not perhaps somewhat comparable to a local improvement district, but it's an ongoing thing. It's something that the property owners would be charged to actually specifically maintain this cove area. And my concern particularly is if the Kaiser comes in first, which is basically not on city land, we still have that kind of agreement in place that we can be able to charge those kinds of fees. And so I don't want to say it's Pacific Property Search's desire whether they have higher maintenance. It's our desire that we have higher maintenance, and I want to make sure that's funded no matter who the ultimate owners of that property is.
I agree with you. Let me just sort of set a factual background here, and then I think that Ed Darrow wants to respond. The Phase 1 and Phase 2 work is going to be done all at once. Even though it's called 2 phases, it's going to be all done at once. So then at the end of that, you will see this area recontoured, the slopes regraded, you'll see the landscaping, the hardscape in, and you'll see the trees. From that period of time until they start building the condos is the period of maintenance we're talking about here. Once the condos get built, then you're going to hear here in a minute that the condo purchasers are going to then be assessed homeowners fees to maintain that area to a higher level. So I think you're right. I think we should probably put something in here that makes sure that that happens, particularly given that Kaiser is coming early on. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good idea. But I just wanted to make sure everybody understood sequentially how this was going to work. So,
Ed Darrow with Pacific Property. Doug, you brought this up at one of our early hearings where you really didn't want to give that property up, and our statement was, well, we're more than happy not to give it up or to take it, but we want to make sure that it's maintained at a very high level. And I think that the intent here is that just during the time frame between when we finish Phase 1 and 2, there's a dead period there when the condos aren't going vertical. As soon as they go vertical, we'll take over that maintenance because we want it to be to the very highest standard. And ultimately, there won't be enough condominium units in Phase 1 to, spread that across, so we'll pick that up as developers. So as soon as we start Phase 1, we'll pick up that maintenance in total, and that'll be done at a high standard. And the other thing about that area, these are going to be native species. In talking with the subcontractor, which is Tufel, these will be very low maintenance type product there. So it's not going to be something that is highly decorative. It's going to be native species that will ultimately come in. So when we go through and clean out the riparian areas and replant those, there is a contractual obligation with that contractor that they have to replace everything within the first year. So we're covering our base on not only what we would lose, but we want to have it done at the highest level.
Okay, questions from the citizen members? Commissioner Crocker, thank you.
I want to say, at first blush, I think it's a very exciting project, and I appreciate and respect the amount of time and attention and money that you guys have put into this on what's really a pretty speculative development, and I appreciate that. There's a couple questions I have about the reimbursement of the time and money that you guys have put into it, as well as the $1.2 million payment for your talent and vision and fortitude. First question I have is any of the money that you guys have already paid so far or invested, any of the 3.3 or it looks like $4.3 million, is that all from external resources, external vendors, or is some of that like self-billed within your own organization, like your own architects that you're charging yourselves, or wholly owned subsidiaries that are charging you?
No, the only thing that would be part of that came to us was a G&A, which was a standard G&A, just a work covering our overhead during the course of the work. All the rest of it, the city will have an opportunity to go through, even that G&A, and look at its third-party vendors. It's primarily architecture and engineering are the two highest one, engineering being the largest. Phenomenal amount of time has gone in on the engineering side, probably $500,000 at least just in that one effort. And that's because of the multiple iterations that we've done from the outreaches that we've done with the public, modifying the design. If you look back, it's not substantially changed, but it's changed enough to where every time you change it, it's a whole new engineering design. So that work you will get an opportunity to review. I'm not sure who will be doing it here. I know that there's a third party that's been hired by the city to go through all the line items of cost, so that'll all be inspected.
And I know we have professionals here with the city that do that stuff, and I really don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, but I just want to make sure that we're looking at some of that stuff. The other thing is, with the $1.2 million, it looks like it's simple interest, but one question I have is 15% per year, but if we get into this project, and let's say for some reason the economy doesn't develop like we're hoping in the next few years, and you guys do decide to pause for 2 or 3 years, are we paying that interest on that $1.2 million?
You're not paying it. It simply increases that credit.
Well, yeah, but in effect, when we resell you the property, in effect, we're losing $225,000 a year just on the interest on that $1.2 million.
That is correct.
But there is a drop dead time. If we don't perform in the 4 years to start, and then we don't perform every 18 months thereafter, then it's gone. We lose the credit. We're taking a phenomenal risk here that not only will the economy turn around, but we'll be able to market what we're going to produce.
Right, but so we are losing that $225,000 a year for every year that it doesn't move forward.
That is correct. And the basis for that is, if you look at any developer and the upfront dollars they invest in a development project, they are looking for a return that high or higher on their risk dollars. And Dave Leland, who's our real estate consultant, would be happy to respond to you. And we just thought that's a reality, and it's fair, and they only get it if they perform. But
Right.
You're right.
Yeah, and I don't have any problem with that, especially with the hard costs. But it seems to me if you guys are asking for this $1.2 million in above and beyond, and I assume I'm just assuming that you guys will actually make some profit on the condos and the development too, right?
I like the assumption.
So I just want to, maybe that's something that we could bring up is, if for some reason you guys can't find the funding to develop some of the commercial spaces or whatever, that maybe we aren't paying the interest on just that portion of it. I mean, I understand the reimbursement.
On the 1.2?
On the 1.2, right.
Okay.
Because in effect, that could turn into a $2.2 million fee if it doesn't move for 4 years.
Okay.
That's just a comment I have, and I'm done.
Let me also add, Commissioner Crocker, that we do have a firm engaged to evaluate their numbers as well. So we're working on that at the present time.
Further questions? Commissioner Nocita.
I'd like to follow up also with what Commissioner Walters was asking back to page 17, and I alluded to this at our last meeting, and I frankly still don't understand it yet. And it goes back to this question of a negative value of the property of $12.07 million, and that is considered as the property as a whole encompassing the entire development. Okay.
In its current condition.
Okay. So what I still don't understand is, and this is what I raised last time, down at the bottom of page 17, the Parker remainder parcel and the Glacier relocation of land, the public's being asked for about $1.8 million total. And
Which page 17 are you on?
oh, I'm
What
sorry.
document?
I'm sorry. That's the staff report. Thank you for clarifying. I'm still not. I have a mental disconnect between the negative appraisal of $12 million and us being asked to pay for property that has a negative value.
Maybe I could respond also. Part of our charge when we came and sat down with the city originally was that it was a responsibility of the developer to pick up any of the private properties that were going to create this whole project. So we went out and negotiated on those properties. Parker as one, Glacier as another. Glacier was actually a functioning business on the Glacier site, on the Parker site. And they were asked indirectly that ultimately they're going to have to move. They made a decision independently to move off the property. Part of the purchase price to Glacier is a relocation cost and part of it is for the actual dirt. Their property that they own is 1.8 acres, right down the very center. And on this drawing over here, you can see that, you might highlight that with a highlighter there. Very small strip that goes right through the middle of the whole project. You cannot do the project without that piece. Give me that point over there. It's right there. It's underneath the paper.
On the other side.
Yeah. So that parcel comes right down through the very center. So it's absolutely necessary. Either we had to acquire it or you had to acquire it, and because we didn't have a development agreement, and part of our charge under the urban renewal was to pick up private property, we went ahead and negotiated that at what in fact we thought was a very good price. Same thing with Parker. What you're being asked to purchase at the 1.3 is less than we paid for it. We're paying $9, you're paying $8.53. Ultimately, that will go into the overall mix. So when you take and look at a negative amount, you take all of the different parcels, it makes up the assemblage. Some of them are positive and some of them are negative. The city's parcel is so phenomenally negative that the ultimate, when you take the pluses and the minuses, you come out with a negative $12 million. So by the city acquiring those pieces, they now hold the whole project in total. We have the obligation to come back and buy it at the point which the condo market turns around. If we don't do it, the city ends up owning what in fact is a completely infrastructured piece of property. All the parks are done, all the riparian area is done, and this portion right here could be put into production, maybe not for condos, maybe you want to change it to offices. It could be done, whatever the market would in fact be charged with. And there would even be a potential that if things didn't turn around, we'd come back to you and say, listen, we would like to go ahead and do a large office complex here. So that's an option that's out there. The intent at this point is to say, you need to own all of the property, and ultimately we'll buy it back from you.
If another question, actually, Mr. Patterson, could you keep that hung up? And I only learned this recently, so it may even be a little off topic because I haven't heard it raised in either the Planning Commission realm or in this Urban Renewal Commission realm, and that's what Tri-City Services District is doing with the former Rossman landfill site, the old Rossman landfill. They're charged to actually mitigate that landfill, which seems to me, from what I've heard of it, is going to be a pretty extensive process of, from my understanding, they're leaving all of the trash on the site, but they are charged with putting a liner underneath it because it's unlined. I don't know. I haven't gotten the details on how they intend to do that. I mean, it could be taking bulldozers and pushing it up on half the site, then putting the line on the site that's been bulldozed, and then after that liner's in place, taking the other side and then pushing it all that trash over to the lined half, then lining the second half, and then pushing the dirt over that. Are you gentlemen aware of that? And have you considered what that would, the dust and the process of that operation would do to your development plans?
That work is going on right now. You've probably seen the crane out there. They're doing their
The
next
crane
phase.
is not for the dump. The crane is for the
If you'll let me
expansion plan.
finish, I'll tell you
Sure.
what it's
is all
for. The
related.
crane is for their current work to improve the site. They're actually going to go over and be moving part of that out vertically, and they did give us a background on it. I don't recall the exact part of it, but it will, in fact, totally be capped. What we're seeing in terms of construction is this right here, right now. It's over there. It's right in this location. And what you're talking about is this parcel right here.
Correct.
And that, they did give us a little background on that, and I don't know, Chettimer is our engineer. Did they give you a design for that you're familiar with?
They're still negotiating with DQ, and they have the plans, and they were working on essentially...
Yes, I'm sorry. We need to have you mic'd so that the people at home and also we can hear you. Thank you. And please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Chettimer Jessica. I'm with WRT Design, head engineer on this project. We have engaged with Tri-Cities on our project, and since we have an access road that will be going through their property, and when they do their work, which they have started right now, first they're excavating the footings for their expansion, and they brought all that excavation material and they piled it basically on that garbage to consolidate it. Then they will, once they construct their improvements, they'll go and take that material and backfill around the buildings. And then what they're planning to do is they're going to go expose the garbage, then go bring the garbage, what's going to be their future ultimate expansion, and pile it up and then just cap it. They're not excavating garbage and installing the liner. They're just capping the garbage to prevent any more leachate coming out of it. And they've been working directly with the DEQ on that. That's nothing to do with our effort. But our main goal is the road that will be constructed through the landfill will be on solid ground.
Agnes Road, you're talking
Yes.
about.
I have a question that may actually lead to a suggestion for the future agendas. Sure. And that is, does the Urban Renewal Commission, like the City Commission, have work sessions?
We can, yes.
Okay.
indeed.
And I raise that because there is a lot of primary information and documentation, such as spreadsheets, legal agreements, et cetera, that we're being given distillations of. For example, Mr. Patterson just mentioned that we have another consultant examining spreadsheets, which I would like to be able to ask questions of, in a work session, so we can get down to the nitty-gritty of information that is more detailed than what we've been seeing in the summaries we've been giving. So that's one suggestion. Another question I have is, and this goes back to my opening comments too, as I also appreciate the fact that this has been going on long before I've been on this commission, long before I was ever even in Oregon City, and possibly before I was even in the state of Oregon. So I'm very cognizant of that fact. And again, I come back to the fact that we are in a recession. There is a credit freeze. It is unknown when the recession will be over. And I think there are questions of basic fiduciary on our part in the information we have to make a decision that I don't have. And I'm just wondering, do we have information on file that we haven't, in what we've been presented, such as, bankers, investors, solvency. I mean, you guys are great gentlemen, but I don't know you. I don't know what kind of financial condition you're in. And it's as deep as your commitment is, there are a lot of people across the country that are struggling, and I don't want to expose the taxpayers to a lot of risk that nothing will ever happen. And I'm still concerned about that, and I think there's more financial fiduciary information that I need to see. In listening to Mr. Janik, I have actually a question for Mr. Janik and for Mr. Leland also, because both of you have mentioned that you've done this for other jurisdictions. And I'm wondering, in the staged nature of this, where a public body invests its own money with the anticipation of a developer or an option of developers coming in after the initial development's been spent by the municipality,
What is your view on how often that actually works well and the project succeeds, as opposed to the municipality spending money and exposing itself, to have the project fail ultimately around the metropolitan Portland area? What do you see as the track record on that?
Well, I can give you an answer on two levels. Let's take the most basic level. What you're being asked to do is this. Go to the bank and see if the bank will loan you $10 million against the increment for this district. If the bank says yes, the bank will be telling you that there's enough tax increment that will automatically flow to pay that off. The next question is, do you want to put $10 million into making this site ready for development, whether it's development by them or development by somebody else? And remember that part of that calculus is, do you want to see Kaiser there? Because Kaiser won't be there unless that $10 million comes in to make this whole area development ready. Now, if you make that judgment in terms of their individual capabilities, in the Kaiser deal, Kaiser has money that is being held back for them to prepare the Kaiser site. The money they need to fix up the rest of the site comes from the city. When they go to take down the land, one of the conditions before they can ever take down a piece of land is they have to come to us at that time and demonstrate that they have the adequate financing to build the condominium project that they propose to build that you approved on that site. Okay? So at each of these several points, there are going to be real-world judgments made about whether this is going to work. But the real question for you is, do you want to spend $10 million at this time on this plan to build this project? My answer on a second level is there are two projects that I did that immediately come to mind. One is the Pearl District in Portland, and the other is Southwest Waterfront. In both of those cases, I represented the private sector side. And in the case of the Pearl, the public invested money in putting in the streetcar. The public invested money in taking down the Lovejoy ramp and reconstructing the Lovejoy ramp. And in return, the developers promised to go out and build residential development and to contribute land for parks. And they've agreed to build residential development at a higher density than they otherwise wanted to do in return for the public making that upfront investment. And it worked. I mean, you can walk around and say it worked. Now, why did it work? Well, because it was the right project, the right market. The public investment was necessary, and once that commitment was made, it then freed up development capital for the numerous 5 to 20-story buildings that you now see there. Those buildings wouldn't have been built without the streetcar, without the Lovejoy ramp. There was a development agreement, just like this one, about 5 times as big, that laid all that out. And yes, that's one that worked. Another one that worked is South Waterfront. In the case of South Waterfront, it was an old brownfield industrial site. As you may recall, there wasn't a whole lot down there. The infrastructure had to go in, meaning all the streets, the roads, the utilities. The streetcar had to be extended. In addition to that, the aerial tram had to be built and committed in order to link it up with OHSU. And those were all public-private, but mostly public commitments of cash that went in first. Now, there was a development agreement there, which I also drafted. And that development agreement, like this one said, the public is going to do this, the private sector is going to do that. The private sector followed through, built the buildings. In that deal, because it was built on tax increment financing in part, the private landowners, if they did not build those buildings, they had to write a check as though they were paying the taxes as though they had built the building, which was the way we secured and assured the public that there would be enough money so that if they didn't build the 25-story John Ross condo tower, which is now built, they'd have to write a check for what the taxes would have been so that we could sell the tax increment bonds. Now, that's a good example of another project that worked. But as you will readily note, and should, the market has changed. And those condos now, the ones that are under construction, aren't selling. So those are the best two contemporary examples that I can give you for a comparable kind of upfront public investment and how it worked. That's why we structured this as an option, giving them time until the market recovers. But if the market never recovers, or if in 4 years it's not recovered, the question you should ask yourself is, am I comfortable with the fact that we spent $10 million covered by tax increment to put this piece of property in a position where it is ready for development whenever the market is there? Or would you rather say to yourself, I'm not going to use tax increment money. I know this project won't be built. I know Parker will go by the wayside. Kaiser will go by the wayside. Glacier will still own that piece, and we'll still own our pieces. That's really the choice you have to make.
Did you wish to respond? Dave?
I have some other examples if you want.
Do you want more examples? Okay, sure, go ahead, please.
I was the conceptualizer and the project manager for Tualatin Commons and helped put that 20-acre project together. And the deal structure there was that the Urban Renewal Board, which was the city council, prescribed that as long as we could hit the budget, hit a timeline of 19 months to get under construction and pre-sell 3 of the 8 parcels, they would go ahead and fund the improvements, which had to do with taking out some roads, building the lake, building the esplanade, and so on. As it turned out, and they were willing to take the risk on the other 5 parcels. Well, as it turns out, we sold 5 of the 8 before we started construction, and there was a binding agreement between the purchasers of those sites, along with design plans, and the city, so that both went forward simultaneously. Part of that negotiation was that there was a significantly reduced land price, which was publicly owned as part of the renewal ownership, in exchange for higher quality materials and a very strong quality image on the lake. That's one that turned out very successfully. I think city money in that was probably around $8 million. It's probably worth closer to $80 to $90 million today in terms of total investment. More recent one was I negotiated the project between the city of Lake Oswego and Graymore on First and A, called Lakeview Plaza. In that case, the city put up the land and agreed to put up the parking garage in exchange for the developer coming in and enclosing the entire project. I think most people in the room are familiar with the project because it's so visible and has such a prominent location. And again, we worked out with legal staff all of the agreements so that the public capital and the private capital went forward simultaneously. And there were a lot of conditions in that one, just as Steve has talked about. For example, the developer had to stabilize the revenue streams and the tenancy, could not sell it for a certain period of time, had to adhere to certain levels of management and so on. And there's a lot of detail if any of the commission wants it. So I think there's a lot of good examples. Most American cities, we find, we work all over the United States, are rebuilding their downtowns through public-private partnerships. And our firm strongly recommended that Ball Janik and Steve in particular be retained by the city because Steve does have such a fabulous track record in putting these successful projects together. So I'd be glad to answer any other questions that I could.
Okay. Commissioner Crocker.
First of all, I appreciate, Mr. Janik, you just laid it out in very simple layman's terms, and for me, as a layman, I really appreciate that. Thank you. Because we can get caught up in all the details and nitty-gritty and all this stuff, and it can really bog up the machine, but you just laid it out in simple terms. Coming back to that a little bit, let's talk about Kaiser, and I'm sure it's in this pile of paper here, but I know there's some stuff that Kaiser agrees to move forward if certain things are met. Is that just phase 1 and 2 that have to be met for Kaiser to go forward?
Yes.
So in essence, if we invest this $10 million in this project, phase 1 and 2 are done, and Kaiser is contractually bound to build that facility and bring 300 jobs?
No. Kaiser is contractually bound to buy the property if we go forward and put in phase 1 and phase 2 work. Kaiser doesn't know, and I've looked at the Kaiser agreement, when it is going to actually build the building. So it is not contractually bound to build that building by a date certain. But Kaiser is going to be putting, I think the price is $7 or $8 million into that site. Presumably they would not be doing that on a whim, but they have a regional plan for when they are building various facilities, and that's why they were unwilling to be pinned down to a date certain. But I can assure you that the Kaiser deal will not go ahead at all unless we agree to the DDA and the Phase 1 and Phase 2 work gets done.
So just to clarify, if we agree to invest this $10 million and Phase 1 and 2 are done, Kaiser is contractually obligated to spend $7 million in the property itself and doing the site prep and all
Yes.
that stuff. So if
Yes.
we spend 10, Kaiser is guaranteed to spend
Well,
7.
They're obligated to. I mean, people can always breach contracts.
Okay.
But the contract says Kaiser agrees to close on the land, to spend this money, to bring their site up to a development level sufficient for an 80,000 square foot medical office building. But, you know, people, I have to tell you, sometimes they breach contracts. But absent a breach, that's what Kaiser's obligated to do.
But it is a precondition to even doing Phase 1 and 2. They will close on the property, so their investment will be into the property at about $7.5 million. So not too many people make an investment of that nature without really being very serious that they're going to build. They just don't have a time frame just because of their organizational structure.
And I just might just a side note, I believe that healthcare industry is one of the few industries making money in this economy.
Just one other annotation there in terms of investment, which Jim was bringing up. As we move through the project, we will be investing on Phase 1, if we do the 80 condominiums, another $8 million. The ratio of debt to equity these days is very high. We'll have a requirement to be putting in another 8. We will actually probably have in total about $14 million of hard equity in this project as we move through it. So when we get to the point of actually taking down Phase 1, the DDA requires us to submit all financials, support that kind of an investment. We're prepared to do that.
Commissioner Neely.
I think it's important as we, for our own vetting, I believe when a certain piece of information came forward that Mayor Norris is the only person that's currently on this urban renewal commission that was on the other one. I believe your team at one point or another, in fact, had a failure, but the project went ahead and proceeded. And I think we need to know that as a commission. I don't think we need to be bid by something in the future that the commission wasn't aware of.
Would you discuss, please, Mr. Janik, or whoever wants to respond, partly relevant to Commissioner Nacita's comments, what documents can be public and what ones cannot be public, or because I'm not positive that we can be privy to all of the documents that perhaps he's talking about. How does that work? Under
If there's a state statute that defines a public document as anything that ends up in your hands, whether it's paper or electronic or whatever. And then there are, I believe, 40 or 50 exemptions from what you have to disclose and what the public has a right to see. And I can't tell you off the top of my head all of them, but some of the things that have been alluded to here tonight may be documents that you can take a look at, but would not be publicly disclosable because they're covered by an exemption. But that's kind of a vague answer. I don't have the statute here in front of me, so I can't give you any more precise answer.
So just to continue on, because I'm curious as well. So if Commissioner Nacita wanted to see that, could he make a personal appointment with an attorney?
Sure.
And then then
Sure.
he wouldn't be allowed to copy those? Or
He could go sit down, go to Ed's office, and take a look
Okay.
at whatever he wanted.
Couldn't we also have an executive session on that matter? So
I don't
No.
know. It's not.
No, executive
not
session
covered.
is a different animal. Executive session doesn't deal with the issue of whether a document is a public record or not. Executive session has more to do with what kind of notice you have to give of that meeting, if you have to give a notice, and it has to do with what the press can report.
Yeah, if I might.
Commissioner Neely?
First of all, I think the benefits that we're going to realize here could be tremendous. We've got a highly degraded site. Whether these condos ever come to fruition within my time on any commission or not, the point is that these are investments in the future of Oregon City. Whether the economic environment's right at this point. It is going to be at one point. This is going to be developed at a certain development standard, and I just I think if there are issues that certain commissioners want to explore, they should be able to explore them. So I think that's important, so that nobody feels left out of the process and finds out something later on that they might have felt differently about in terms of their voting procedure. I did want to make one point, and it sounds like it's a Phase 8 project, but it's really Phase 1. Phase 2, I should say. Yeah, in the plans that I've seen no specific access being given to what's being discussed up there as a canoe kayak launch area. I want to make sure the esplanade is used for essentially pedestrian, bicycle type activities. I realize that there will be activities going on that will necessitate probably vehicles to go in to set up something for a day, come back in and take them out and so forth. But I want to make clear that is not to be used for vehicular traffic,
No.
even ones that will take in a kayak.
Absolutely, that is not the intent. It's primarily just for pedestrian use and for specific special venues. It would probably be sponsored by the city, or in the case of Lake Oswego, they actually hired a third person to create these different venues. So that's really, it's a public area.
I have a question. Since we have hired an attorney to protect our interests, that you do work for us, correct?
Of course.
So as you drafted the document, you were considering the risk to the community.
Correct.
And you pointed out some places that might be gray, but one more time, where, I guess if you were sitting here, where would you see the places of greatest risk for the city? Knowing what you know and knowing what you've put into the document.
I think the places of greatest risk for the city would be this. First, if you go to the bank to try to get the credit facility and can't, and you try to, shall we say, stretch too much to get there, and you, in effect, borrow money you really probably shouldn't borrow, it's too skinny, that would be a risk. The second thing is...
but that would be taken later.
That'd be taken later.
Okay.
That'd be taken later. The second risk you have is, let's say you put the money in, these guys perform as they should, and it's 3 or 4 years later, and we still don't have a condo market. And you're going to end up with a site that's ready to develop that people have come to enjoy as a public park-like area. And then the market comes back. These guys are gone. They've lost all their dough. We feel sorry for Ed. He's gone. and a new developer comes along, and the public has become enamored of this site as not a development opportunity, but as a
Park.
a grassland open space. So that's a different kind of risk. Then the other risks that are there are if people default. Let's say that, starting with defaults, if PPS defaults and they're in the middle of the Phase 1 and 2 construction work, then all of a sudden a big responsibility has landed on your desk. You got to go hire a project manager. You got to go sit down with the general contractor and say, we've now taken over your contract. We're going to be out there performing the work that PPS should have performed. And that'll be a real pain. But you will be protected and able to do that. The next risk would be if the general contractor who gave you the guaranteed maximum price and gave it to Ed, if that contractor goes bankrupt or defaults, he's going to have to go get another contractor. And he's going to be back here in front of you saying, that guy gave me a guaranteed maximum price of this, and now prices have changed. The new contractor now wants more money. What are we going to do? And we are then going to be negotiating as to whether we pick up any of that risk, which we have no obligation to do. But he may come here in front of you and say, there's just no way we can make a go of this project. We need some additional help from the city. And that's not his fault, not your fault, but it's a potential risk and a potential reality. So those are the kinds of risks that I see. And then I go right back to Commissioner Nacita's the conversation we had before. If you're sitting here 5 years from now and the market isn't there, are you going to feel good about the investment? And one other point that's only tangentially related to your question is this. Remember that once property goes into an urban renewal area, those tax dollars come in every year. They're locked in the urban renewal area. They must be used in the urban renewal area. So the real question is, for you, one of priorities. This money is going to come into your coffers. It must be used in the urban renewal area. So you have to prioritize where those dollars get used. And if this project rises to the top of your priority list, then it's probably sensible to spend the dollars. If, however, there are other projects that have a much greater priority, then you would act accordingly. So it's not like you can go spend the money on any number of other things, because there's a limited range of things you can do with the tax increment dollars.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shaw.
Mr. Janik, that, we keep talking about the condo market, but this property could be marketed for any kind of commercial activity. Is that correct?
It's a mixed-use zone. It could be any kind of commercial activity.
Okay.
You could see high-rise, mid-rise apartments. You could see mid-rise office buildings. You could see any number of things like that.
But it could turn out to be kind of a medical plaza down there.
It could turn out to be a medical office complex. For example, if Kaiser goes in there, you could see specialty medical practitioners deciding that I'm a dermatologist, I want to build a 2-story dermatology clinic with a view out over the cove. Absolutely.
Okay.
Commissioner Nacita.
While we've been having the discussions, and this is why discussions are useful, is because they make people think, and I've had a thought I'd like to throw out to Mr. Janik and Mr. Leland and Mr. Patterson, too, if he has some thoughts on it. I've been, harping tonight on the potential risks of the Cove project. But I had a thought that may, help me allay my concerns. Have there been any numbers run on this project as if it were solely a Kaiser project? In other words, if the worst case scenario happened and the Cove never materialized and we were, left with this graded site, are the returns in taxes, property taxes, new economic development from the Kaiser project only, would that be enough to give the city a positive return on the $10 million investment alone, if the worst case scenario happened and the Cove project itself never materialized?
The answer is yes, and I'll let Larry amplify. But the basic principle is the $10 million you're putting in is supported by tax increment from other areas of the district. It is not dependent upon the Kaiser building. It is not dependent upon the Cove. It's not dependent upon any development here. So anything you get on top of that would be positive.
But I'm not talking about district-wide. I'm talking about with the specific, real estate development of the Kaiser facility.
Let me see. We haven't run the numbers with Kaiser specific. We can do that. We need to get a little bit more detail from Kaiser. But again, we were trying to look at it of what if, worst case scenario, we didn't have any development. And let me just run you through where you stand with urban renewal again. Right now, the downtown urban renewal district has an assessed value of $145.9 million, of which $95.9 million is above the frozen base. Currently, it is generating on an annual basis $1.6 million of revenue to the district. Actually, it's 1,653, I think, which roughly you can issue for every $100,000 you can issue $1 million worth of debt. So you could issue $1.65 million worth of debt today, which we've issued $10 million, which we did earlier in the year. The district, by statute, is going to grow by 3% on an annual basis, which actually ends up being a little less because you've got a difference between real market value and taxable value. So we looked at that in terms of what happens if we didn't have any other development other than the park development, which generates no increment, and making the site development ready, which also generates no increment. And we ran that out, and it appears that in the year, I think it's, where did I write that down? I think it's 3 years, that at that point you could convert the line of credit if we're able to achieve that. And this is the thing the bank's going to be looking at, to a more permanent structure, which would be a bonded debt. So we can cover the cost of this $10 million without any additional building going on there. Now, any additional building going on there, and you're looking at an 80,000 square foot medical building that is taxable, and we can get some estimates on what that value is going to be and run those numbers for you. It's going to generate additional increment that's going to be above and beyond that. Now, you could take that $10 million, I suppose, just whatever that's going to generate, however long you want to run it out. It probably, you could say you could cover that, but everything else that happens at the Cove or anywhere around that the Cove stimulates is going to add to the ability to repay that on a faster time frame than what we've got there. Again, the scenario that I've given you in the packet, kind of dealing with, the one that says urban renewal impact on services. And if you'll turn back to the spreadsheet that looks like this.
Looks like what? Did you hold that up again?
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
the one running out the values.
In one of your memos?
Yeah, it's the memo that's
says
turns
urban-
urban renewal
yeah.
impact on services.
February 4th.
And you have a chart in the back. It's called Chart 1, Return on Urban Renewal Investment with only the Cove development. Now, this is assuming an assessed value growth of 3% annually and just the Cove. Nothing else, just the Cove and 3% on what you already have. And if you look down to that, if we didn't do anything, well, if you didn't do the Cove from this point until 2021, is you're going to divert $25.8 million from other taxing jurisdictions to the Urban Renewal Agency. If you develop the Cove and you ended the district when you had that paid off, which is in 2021, those would come back on the tax rolls in 2022, and as opposed to the Urban Renewal District, as you know it, generating $2.4 million in taxes per year, it would be generating $4.6 million. Again, that's just with a 3% growth in the Cove, nothing else happening in the entire Urban Renewal District. That would take roughly till 2031 to repay that total $25 million that had been diverted during the period between 2009 and 2021. And again, that's only with 3% growth in just the Cove, nothing else in the Urban Renewal District. So that kind of gives you a quick look at that.
Okay. Citizen member questions? Commissioner West. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one here. Commissioner Slack.
I just have a comment as I hear, I've looked at in various investments over all the years, and it's pretty unusual when you can invest $10 million and have an asset worth $10 million, or likely. I mean, there's always a risk that it wouldn't, but the chance that in time it's going to be worth $10 million and you've got something to do with, it's not like soft costs that you've invested $10 million and when everything goes upside down, you've lost everything. So I think, there is risk, but I look at this as a fairly well-situated kind of risk that, maybe has us less chance for loss than other kinds of investment that you can make. So,
Okay. Commissioner West.
So maybe the comparison could be drawn as in some other cities or communities investing in an office park or for development there. Only our office park wouldn't have light industrial, that type of things. But basically, another city might be investing in it for the streets and lighting and having everything ready to go, and in lieu of hoping they're going to locate businesses there. So, of course, it's not quite the comparison, but that's the worst case scenario on this, the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I think you're correct.
Okay. While you're thinking, we have another meeting in 2 weeks. Is everyone available on the 18th? And at that time, unless there's an extension, we need to consider which documents, the development agreement only, or also the concept development. Are the two separate documents that we'll be considering?
Yep.
Like on the agenda this evening, okay?
And again, if you have questions about the concept development or Phase 1 and 2 product, that's the other agenda item we have on here this evening, to receive any questions. And Mr. Darrell, Mr. Tyler can answer that in regards to that product, because that's something else you need to approve.
Okay.
to be comfortable.
Let's move into that.
You can also, if you have other questions about the document, you can call me up or send me an email.
Yes, and that's great to do.
In fact, actually, if you have specific questions, it'd be nice if we could get those kind of
Ahead
in
of
writing,
time.
because that way we can understand clearly what's being asked, and we can spend the time and look into it. 'Cause
Great, okay. Let's move into the concept development plan then. And does anyone have, that's the fat book, does anyone have any questions about that? Commissioner Neely?
I've got a couple. Firestone Drive is a state facility. Question?
Ms. Crushhour, can you answer that? It took me a minute to figure out where is Firestone Drive.
I didn't even know where it was
Firestone
either.
Alley.
Yeah.
No, it's called Drive in here. Firestone Alley is what Jerry Herman calls it.
But Firestone Drive is within the state right of way.
And so it is a state facility.
Yes.
If there was a way in our mechanism to knock that access off to McLaughlin, it really serves it. I think it's a lousy facility to access McLaughlin Boulevard from. Personal opinion, it's great for serving the parking lot of Oregon
Shopping
City
center.
Shopping Center, but it's a lousy facility for getting onto McLaughlin Boulevard. And if there's a way we can deal with ODOT on that issue, you're talking about putting a barrier, I think, so that nobody could make a left turn onto McLaughlin out of that facility. I prefer nobody could make any turn out of that facility.
ODOT is discussing that. We have differences of opinion.
I
on
know.
all of that.
We always have differences of opinion with ODOT, and they usually win, too. But I need to bring that up. I think it's a lousy facility. The other question I had was Agnes Road. You have the new Agnes Road then becomes a city street, or is it a private road? The new one.
It would be a city road.
Okay.
But we don't like calling that the new one. It is Agnes Drive, it just
Right.
with
It's just relocated.
improvements.
Relocate.
Well, then you're going to have to change the name of what we got, because you're still going to have people accessing it to get to some businesses there. Change the name. Don't call it Agnes at all. Anyway, my question really is this. You show, I think this shows the development of that, and I may be getting off the master plan, but I don't care where it's coming from. That from the project by Tri-City Sewer, it's a gravel road. If I read the document correctly.
Nancy, you know what the design on that is?
Well, this is not I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to discuss conditions of approval of the Planning Commission land use decision, but as I understand it, one of the conditions of approval that staff would be proposing is that it not be gravel and that it be paved.
Good. Those are my two questions.
Good. Did you want to proceed? I see you have a PowerPoint keyed up.
Yes, but just to go back to the Agnes, it's going in as a 20-foot wide, and I believe it has the bike paths, and then it'll ultimately go to a full street when the condos are
I think you
built.
got one bike path going in one direction, someplace else another bike path going in different direction.
That's correct. Randy, why don't you go into this?
Good evening, I'm Randy Tyler. We'll try to go through this very quickly. Just kind of summarizes the what's happened over the years with the project, and then goes into some of the specifics. Well, one thing that was interesting when I came across the end of the Oregon Trail document, that was about 19 years ago, But if you look at the uses around the cove, they're very similar to what we're talking about now. I mean, some of the things are moved around, but it's just interesting that this has been in the works for so many years. This, a few years later, was a proposal that was done by a landscape architect, Bob Foster, for a particular user. And then coming current up to our site plan for the Cove project. And again, just really quickly, the project fulfills, I think there's 10 goals, economic development goals in the regional center, and this meets every one of them. Some of the most important ones are the job creation, construction jobs, and permanent jobs. There are high-paying, potentially high-paying jobs in the medical facility, the office building. They're exactly what cities look for when they're trying to recruit businesses, high income, low environmental problems. And then, of course, there's a multiplier effect. Depending upon what multiplier you choose, you can take the 250 jobs and say, well, in total, that's really responsible for twice as many jobs. And, of course, new property taxes, which haven't been happening, obviously, lately. The environment, we look at this as patting ourselves on the back for doing a good job for the environment, particularly the idea of creating a positive impact. This is a source of funds to clean up a messy industrial site. We will get rid of the invasive species, we'll regrade the site and do a revegetation with native plants in the riparian area. The habitat actually be expanded considerably from what it currently is. There's right now just a very narrow strip of vegetation along the edge of the cove. One of the documents I looked up said that was considered degraded on most of that area around the cove. The only exceptions were the peninsula and the area opposite the peninsula. I think I wanted to mention the green practices in terms of the buildings, the permeable paving, the rain gardens, and the biofiltration. And we have Chetamir to thank for a lot of that because he's an expert in that area. The public parks and recreation, 72% open space is just incredible. A typical mixed-use project might have 20%. The public access, all the land around the cove is owned by the city or the Urban Renewal Agency, and that won't change. But what will change is we'll add a lot of public amenities to that in terms of pathways, trails, interpretive signs, canoe and kayak availability, marinas, restaurants. The idea is that this will be a fun, lively place to go, and people will enjoy it and really be proud of it.
Mr. Tyler, who is the owner of the cove itself, the water body?
We are.
The city. That's 61 acres, which is takes in that body of water.
Thank you.
In terms of the status of the land use approvals, we've had, the plan is consistent with the comprehensive plan, it's consistent with the zoning ordinance, and it's consistent with the development code. Planning staff, after careful review, has recommended approval with conditions. And we've had 2 public hearings before the Planning Commission, and we'll have a 3rd meeting Monday night. In terms of the urban renewal portion of it, the site has obviously got some real nasty inherent problems, being in the flood zone, having uncompacted soils, being a former industrial site, and the engineers can figure out, fortunately, how to solve all those problems. Currently, there are no taxes being generated, and with the public and private investment, there will be a new tax base. With the new tax base, the investment will be repaid, and also, we believe, a lot of additional development will be stimulated by this. I think, what is it, that new project that Fred did, that Bridgeport. Bridgeport had a core vision that Fred Bruning was responsible for, but once activity got going there, a whole bunch of new businesses sprouted up around that. And when we talk about the multiplier here of investing $10 million and attracting $150 million in investment, that 15-to-1 ratio that that Dave Leland spoke of, that doesn't count any of the other development opportunities that may be surrounding the area. And we've had, I guess that's the end of that quick show. We feel fortunate to have been endorsed by a diverse group of people, from the Chamber of Commerce to the Park Place Neighborhood Association to Jerry Herman, to a variety of folks, and we appreciate that they appreciate what we've attempted to do as we move through the process. So, you want to add anything, Ed?
I think you did a great job. I think that kind of winds up our presentation. We're open for questions if that's appropriate.
Great. I think an opportunity for questions, and then we do have some cards for public comment. So we need to finish in 15 minutes, so let's be succinct. Commissioner Neely.
A statement. Your map did not show that one phase where we had that whole area in baseball and soccer fields. So there were other uses contemplated.
Okay.
That's true. Other questions? All right, let's open up for public comment. I have two. Phil Yates, followed by Paul Edgar. If you want to come up together, that would be great. So please introduce yourself and tell us the city in which you live. Paul, if you'd like to come up at the same time. Thank you.
My name is Phil Yates. I live in Oregon City. First, I'd like to say I think this is a good project. I'd like to be able to support it. There are a couple of things that I think it needs. One was mentioned by Commissioner Neely in his comments earlier, which is, I think, some sort of local improvement district to create some revenues for some ongoing costs here. One cost has not been mentioned, and that's the cost of keeping the cove a cove. Currently, it's got some problems with respect to no water flow, and there's an application from the city using city funds and county funds to do the gravel so that the cove won't die essentially and fill up with mud. And what I'm concerned about with respect to that is that seems like an ongoing maintenance issue, that there's going to be recurring every 5 years, every 10 years, I'm not sure how often, we're going to need to go out in that river and improve it, and who's going to pay for that? And it seems to me we really ought to include in this development agreement some sort of requirement that there be an LID or some sort of way to collect fees to cover not only the cost of the police, the parks, and the other kinds of things that are going to burden this city's strained budget. And it seems to me that somehow that development ought to be structured to pay for that. And the other issue to me is not just the continuing thing, but what if these fish people who are regulating our ability to do this cleanup of the cove say no? They could just say, no, you can't do it. We don't want you to move the gravel. We don't care that your cove gets filled in and it becomes a mud flat. Are we really going to expect the kind of high-end development that we would like to see if there was places where canoes and kayaks could be, when instead you've got cattails and a mud flat? I mean, what are we going to do if we end up with that? Because there didn't used to be a cove there. It used to be a floodplain, and if it becomes a floodplain again, what are we going to do with that? It seems to me we're almost, in a way, putting the cart before the horse, because if the state or the feds say no to what we need to do to keep the cove alive, it seems like a really important issue that we don't know the answer to and won't know for 6 months. So that's number one. Number two, it strikes me that even though I would, I think, support this thing if this LID were set up and the fees were there to make sure that this thing wasn't going to ruin our budget, I still believe, just as a matter of good governance, that there are enough risks involved. One of the risks you didn't mention, Mr. Janik, was just there could be a 500-year flood here. Right after you spend all your money, there could be a 500-year flood, and we could have what's called flood blight. There are significant risks that I think haven't been mentioned tonight. And even though I may be willing, or you may be willing, to accept those risks on behalf of the city, it strikes me that it's a big enough deal that we really ought to seek the approval of the voters before we engage in borrowing these kinds of funds. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Paul? Why don't you just pass that so you don't cut into your time? Yeah. We'll just pass those out. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and members of the Urban Renewal Commission. My name is Paul Edgar. I'm a citizen of Oregon City. I had the opportunity to ask our fire chief for Clackamas County, and he provided me this document. And I think it's pertinent as we take a look at urban renewal and its total cost and implications and how it affects our own priorities as we look at things. We already know that public safety is a critical factor, as well as schools, and whenever we use urban renewal, we're effectively taking money right from Clackamas Community College. We're taking it from police and from the fire department. But when we look at the totality of urban renewal impact, one of the things that's very clear is, as an example, when we look at Clackamas Town Center, we see an excess value, and we see the amount of money that has been diverted away from the Clackamas County Fire District Number 1. And it's $1,202,000 this year. And when we take the other areas, Oregon City is diverting $230,000 from Clackamas County. But I went down there in this analogy, and I was trying to get from Ed some information, and I said, well, we have the Clackamas Town Center, but you have to put fire stations there. You have to put people there. You have to put apparatus and equipment there. So what does he have? My golly, he's got $5 million worth of buildings there and no money coming in. Whenever you take urban renewal money and start reapplying it, somebody has to pay. And in this case, our taxes in Oregon City effectively are paying for Sunnyside Road. We're being backdoored. And in a case maybe at Park Place Elementary School, we're taking food right out of the mouths of 50% of the students at Park Place Elementary School are in low income. They get breakfast and lunch, and that may be their critical meals that they get every day. And when we take money and apply it through urban renewal, we're taking money. We're taking $500,000 right now, every year, right, that should have gone to the Oregon City School District. That's fact. We know that. But when you take a look at this, and this is kind of the totality of looking at urban renewal, we must raise the bar. We can't make mistakes. We must do a value judgment. Look at ourselves. Look in the mirror. Because we're taking cops off the street. We're paying for things. And somehow we've got to make sure we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's in a manner higher than what just a cursory view.
Thank you. Next, Dan Fowler and Elizabeth Fowler.
I've came and commented to this commission before, and I want to thank you for allowing me to be here again. Tonight I just wanted to present you with a letter of endorsement for the Cove project from the Main Street Oregon City group that is formed. We feel that this development plays a vital role in the development of our downtown district and are in support of the project. That being said, I do think that some of the points are valid that the commission has brought up tonight, and I encourage you to find resolve on those issues and get the answers that you're looking for before you're asked to make the decision. I would also urge the commission to do this in a timely fashion, knowing that Kaiser is kind of an integral piece to this development, and just not let this kind of opportunity slip by our fingers for the citizens of Oregon City. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Fowler, just a couple of comments. Again, I had an opportunity to speak before. I wanted to just emphasize one of the points that was mentioned earlier, in that activity does breed activity. And I think within the Urban Renewal District, I know that just speaking from personal experience, even in a down economy, when businesses are looking to come here, they look at the total area, what's going on. And just knowing the potential of the Cove development and the potential of the possible Rivers developments, bringing interest to the city. And I think that if we can begin to show that those are starting to have traction, that more and more businesses will in fact be here. The other comment I would make, and this is maybe just in general, in favor of urban renewal as a tool to improve our city. It's used in blighted areas. Its purpose takes vision. Its purpose takes a long-term view, because you have to think, what would we have if we had done nothing? How much assessed value growth for all the schools and the fire districts would we have if we do nothing? Because that's the real comparison. Also, just a small point in that our schools really receive funding through the state of Oregon. We're an income tax-driven state, and by creating jobs and income will be the best thing we could do to help fund our schools.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers?
I have a question for Mr. Fowler, if I can indulge him.
Commissioner Zeta?
I want to put you on the spot. And the reason I want to put you on the spot is you're uniquely situated. You used to be mayor of Oregon City, and now you do real estate development, my understanding. So you are very experienced on both sides of the fence, as it were. And I want to ask your opinion. One, as a private real estate developer, what threshold are you typically asked to meet when you go to a bank for financing? And do you think the Urban Renewal Commission should be as stringent as a bank would? Why don't you answer that question first?
Well, the threshold that you're asked to meet is the lending requirements based on the project you're presenting. And that has to do with debt coverage. So in today's market, it's usually a 20 to 30% down and a debt coverage of 1.3 to 1.5% in today's market. I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of technical, but
yeah. And from your former role as mayor, I assume we had an urban renewal commission then, and I'm just wondering, back then, what typically were the standards and criteria that by which urban renewal development lending applications were judged by?
Well, we didn't have any. Back then, we were trying to get enough increment from a district that was declining in value. It was really hard to help downtown when there was absolutely no increment. You had negative value. You talk about negative value. We understood negative value. It was going down. And one of the dilemmas at that time was to stop that to the point where value began to grow, so we had some increment so that we could do things like buy this property for redevelopment. So we didn't have the specific application. We spent our increment and our time buying waterfronts and buying this property so you could be sitting here today hopefully making the right decisions to add more value to our city.
Thank you. Our time is getting very short. We have one more speaker.
I'd like to make a quick comment. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead with that speaker, then I want to make a quick comment.
Okay, very quick. William Gifford. I'd like to be out of here in 4 minutes.
Well, it'd be a lot less than that if I have anything to say about it. Thank
Yes,
you very
thank
much, Mayor and Commission. Excuse me for, I had a couple of other
Introduce
questions.
yourself, please.
My name is William Gifford. I live in Oregon City. And I have some other questions that I'll take offline, but I just want to underscore Mr. Yates's concern about continuing maintenance costs. I see the issue of, under the maintenance plan, maintaining to the standard until Phase 4 begins, that park area, and I'm wondering to know how that is going to be funded. And I'm also concerned about the maintenance of the cove as with water circulation and viability in that regard as well. I just think I haven't heard much discussion about how we're going to maintain the area.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson.
Madam Mayor, in response to a couple of things this evening, at this safe time, there is a memo that I have. It's outside as well as at your place in regards to parks maintenance, because that's a question that came up, kind of talking about that issue. And I think that addresses that issue. Again, if we want to look at another mechanism, we can do that as well. Additionally, you have a memo talking about urban renewal impact on services, and that addresses the City of Oregon City's urban renewal district. I won't try to speak for the county. I'll let them talk about their urban renewal districts if you want something from them. But it does address some of the concerns you've heard, and in particularly in schools, is you, and I think Mr. Fowler hit upon that, is you have to really look at the funding formula by how schools are funded today. And urban renewal actually does not have an impact on the funding of schools. The diversion from Oregon City Schools is roughly $476,000 a year, but you look in Oregon at a combination of funds. You look at the local funds and you look at state funds, all seen as one pool. And then it's based on an enrollment and a per-student cost, and whatever that is what goes back to the schools. If you have a higher amount of local resources, you get less state resources, and then that amount that you made up at the local level is going to go someplace else, or the state portion is going to go. If you have a lower amount of local revenues, then you get a higher amount of state revenues, because you're only going to get the formula amount, because again, you're looking at schools as a total system throughout the state, not just Oregon City School District or Tualatin School District. So again, urban renewal does not have an impact on the school system today. I've also gone through here and gave you an analysis looking at Clackamas County Fire District number 1 in our urban renewal district. I think you will see that the annexation of Oregon City was actually a benefit to the fire district, and though there is dollars diverted from the fire district, overall I think they are healthy in Oregon City, and I think you could talk a little bit about maybe the service levels we have here.
I know we have a question. May I just divert just for a second? We have another agenda item, which is a grant application. I see. Did he leave? Oh, okay. Our grant applicant is here. So, but unless you want to approve it without discussion, may we hold this over?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now,
the only statement I wanted to make was simply this: We've never had a board member from the fire district nor a board member from the school district ever come in here and testify against this program.
Yeah, and I've had several conversations with the school, and they've indicated that's not an issue with them.
so yes, Commissioner Slack, quickly.
I just, as we've got all of this here, I'm impressed with the amount of work that our staff is putting into this. And I just want to make sure we said thank you, because they've got to be burning lots of hours providing what we're doing to make the decision, and I think it's appropriate to say thank you.
Thank you. And beyond that, too, it was succinct. I think you really got to the essence for me, so that, as a layperson, I could really understand it. So I appreciate you all coming. Yes, Commissioner Crocker.
I think in looking at this, and I think I've gained even more clarity tonight. And one of the things I think I want to point out is that good business and investing minds tend to go with the mantra that you buy when others are fearful, and you're fearful when others are greedy. And I think, honestly, if you're going to do a development like this, it's probably best to start in an economy like this, because then it's ready when the economy does turn around. I think the worst situation would have been to start this when everything was riding high and everybody thought there's no end to real estate. It takes a lot of bravery and a lot of guts, but I think this is the right time to be doing this. And the other thing, I want to make sure, if we can forecast 20 years in the future, if we want to look back at this date, are we going to say to ourselves, sure, I'm glad we all were a part of this and made this thing happen, because look what it's done for Oregon City? Or are we going to say, man, we sure missed the boat on that? And I think we saw it's already happened a couple times in the last 20 years that nothing's been done. So just those two comments.
Thank you. I think the comments have been excellent. The questions good. I look forward to our next meeting. We are adjourned.